Hi, it's Dave. Welcome. Today I'm joined by Andrea James. She is a former Tesla analyst with Dougherty Company from 2010 to 2016. She was one of the most outspoken and well-reasoned Tesla analysts probably in history. I had the privilege of interviewing Andrea in 2016 on my YouTube channel, and it just became an instant hit. And I've had hundreds, literally hundreds of requests to do a follow-up interview with Andrea. And so finally, I'm honored to welcome Andrea to the show. Welcome, Andrea.
Yeah, thank you so much. I can't believe it's been 5 years since I talked to you.
Yeah, it's been amazing. I mean, that interview, it was just a casual kind of conversation between, two people who are bullish on Tesla. And it was right after you had left, I think, being an analyst. You had stepped down, and I was like
Great.
dying to
It
talk
was
with you.
super casual because it was a summer day. I had taken a little bit, I was doing coaching at the time. I had taken a little bit of time. I wasn't stock analyzing. I think I went on a run and I took a shower and I just like showed up. My hair was wet and I was like, all right, let's just chat, and it's so funny that got so many views on YouTube. So, like I said, I dried my hair this time.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, I think to early Tesla bulls, you were kind of this light or this kind of a model of just rationality. And you were one of the few Tesla analysts out there who was willing to step up and say, "Hey, Tesla has a huge future ahead." And you were getting to debates with bears, on CNBC. And I think something about that whole experience is the Tesla early bulls will never forget, I think, your kind of role in early Tesla history. I mean, what are some of your memories of being an early Tesla analyst? Like, what sticks out? Were there anything that was like memorable and enjoyable, or what stays around?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Well, so first of all, I mean, like this is like so long ago now. If you think about like when they IPO'd, we're talking a decade of life lived and stuff like that. But yeah, I remember being very, very excited about the company. I remember obviously when we very first started out, and I think I shared this with you in 2016, we started out with sort of a bearish proposition, like we were skeptical before we ever even published. And then the more research we did, the more excited we got. And so, had a lot of conviction. I also had the advantage too of seeing some of my peers get other stuff wrong, and it helped me to realize that like not everybody just because you state something with confidence doesn't mean you're right. So it allowed me to hold on to my convictions based on the research that I was doing. So yeah, so I have a lot of great memories. I have a lot of memories of like before the Model S even came to market, right? The Roadster was the only car that they were selling. And I remember they had the very first, sort of test drive event where they were driving them around in Fremont. I think that would have been fall 2011, the very first Model S test drive event. And it was very glamorous. Elon was there, and a bunch of people who had reserved multiple vehicles were there. In those days, like analysts got VIP access. By the time the Model 3 launched, analysts no longer had VIP access. But so it was really cool. We were in like the VIP area, just kind of up on this dais, watching the cars go around all night. And then I remember the entire next morning just being on the phone with investors, like one after the other, who couldn't make it to the event. Like, were the cars actually driving? I mean, everybody had this question, could they actually build a vehicle that would drive and then mass produce it? So that was really fun. And I also remember touring the factory. Goodness, I think it would have been early 2011 when the robots hadn't even been installed yet. And it was just like, and actually I remember really silly things like Elon wanted to paint it the whole thing white. He was like, let's just paint it white. Like it's going to be like this bright, shiny factory. So there was a lot, it was really fun to watch the company go from like 0 to 1 and over the course of maybe 5 or 6 years.
Hmm. Yeah, it's been a long time, since Tesla got Tesla went public. It went through its early years. I mean, what do you remember from kind of those early years where there's so much like media coverage that was so negative on Tesla, where so many people were expecting this company to go belly up. There were a lot of people who were considering Elon to be a fraud, to the whole company, right? To
Yeah.
just not a legitimate company. And like, yeah, when you look back, kind of, now it's, 2021, but when you look back at that, how do you make sense of all that? Like, how were so many people convinced that Tesla was going to fail, and how did it end up succeeding? I mean, it just seems like a crazy story in retrospect.
Yeah, that's so. I think, you know, Tesla's not a conventional company, and so they sort of defied conventional wisdom. There's a reason why that's conventional. I think there was just a lot of skepticism of electric vehicles in general. People couldn't imagine how they could be widespread. I mean, I remember the infrastructure question came up all the time. It still comes up. Well, there's no infrastructure. It's like, actually, there's infrastructure to deliver electricity everywhere. We're actually perfectly set up for electric vehicles. But so there was just a lot of misperceptions. The other thing I think is that controversy sells, and there was something about Tesla, like just putting Tesla in a headline. Got hits for the media, and so if you write about Tesla, you're going to get attention. And so there's a lot of incentive there to write stories or find stories or write things. And so, there was a lot of media attention. There still is. I mean, I think Tesla is really up there in terms of, how much attention it gets. In general, people are just really interested in the company. And in terms of the negativity, I mean, I think sometimes, they were perceived at some points really to be an overdog, even though they were the underdog. And I think there was this sense that just because Elon is wealthy, and like there was a sense that like, well, we're going to take them down a peg. At least that was my sense of things. There was this mainstream idea that they weren't the underdog when actually they really were. I mean, if you look at what they were up against and still are up against. But I think there was this perception that they weren't. And so there was we're going to take them down a peg, or we're going to hold them to account, or hold their feet to the fire, which is what, the role of journalism is. I mean, obviously there was different, there's, there's the media aspect of it, and then there's the Wall Street aspect of it. There was a lot of I remember there was a lot of groupthink at the time, about Tesla. And I think that actually happens with a lot of things that, people fall into groupthink, and you heard somebody say, oh, that's never going to work. And it just becomes like the intelligent thing to say. And was my perception of what a lot of it was.
Did you, I mean, there was a lot of, short interest at that time back in 2000, let's say, 11, 12, 13, up until like 15 or 16, actually up until when you left being an analyst. I mean, it was really, really high. And along with that, you had always the negative bear articles and media coverage. Do you think any of that was like coordinated? Do you think any of that was from, the shorts? Or do you think this was just kind of more a loosely just organic type of, movement against Tesla during that time?
I mean, I don't have any insight into any of that. I do think, when you raise convertible debt, which Tesla did a lot of converts, you create a class of investors who profit off of volatility. So, they'll buy the convert and short the stock. And so, the market becomes incentivized to create volatility. So I think there were incentives there to do so, maybe even more so than a company that, wasn't a frequent shopper of the capital markets and the convertible debt markets, which is why their current free cash flow is so exciting. Who knows if they're going to keep doing that, but maybe they don't have to as much. So there's a little bit of that at play, I think. I mean, that's just a theory. I have no proof of that. In terms of whether it was a coordinated efforts of the shorts, I don't know. I mean, I know people have theorized on that. I don't know if anything was ever discovered. I do think people talk. I mean, I think there's like whisper networks, and I think people talk and chatter and all that stuff. But in terms of like, trying to take the company down, I'm not sure. The CEO I work for now, our current company, he went on Reddit and talked about there was like a mole in the company I work for now, but years ago. This was like back in the early 2000s, but there was like a mole in the company paid for by the shorts, and it was just a really interesting time for the company. They went through a lot of volatility back then. So like, we do believe those kinds of things happen, but I don't know for sure if it ever happened to Tesla.
Yeah, that's interesting. Nowadays, one of the biggest short arguments is, competition is coming. Tesla, had the early lead, but you have VW and all these other companies coming. Back in the day when you're an analyst, what was the number one kind of bear argument or short argument, and what was your response to that?
Oh gosh, what was the number one bear argument? I think the earliest arguments were on, well, two, demand, supply and demand, right? There is really easy. That's a really easy answer. But like number one, people aren't going to want the car. And then number two, Tesla's not going to be able to make it. So there's not going to be any supply or there's not going to be any demand. I mean, really everything kind of boiled down to those two things. I mean, Tesla had to learn a lot about how to make a car. I mean, early on, they didn't know how to make a car. They had to learn. I mean, it was this growth mindset, right? And you were kind of betting really, really early. You were betting that they would learn a lot about how to make cars. And they hired people from the auto industry, but, there hadn't been a new successful car company in since when, And so, that was a lot to overcome. I mean, I believe there was at one point, and forgive me, all the years run together, I remember, stating publicly that Tesla had learned more about building cars in the past few years than the rest of the auto industry had learned about building electric vehicles, because that is a different thing. So, yeah, I think that's really what it boiled down to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm wondering, when you look back at your research, I know you've stated, in our interview, but other places, like one of your key things was the due diligence, that you put in the work and you really kind of went into the weeds, and you broke down, the battery costs and the powertrain costs and different parts of the car, and you contacted suppliers and you really tried to take research to another level. How did that help you assess Tesla and help you to kind of get confidence that Tesla was going to be able to ramp the Model 3 and become a successful auto company, when most people and analysts at that time were very skeptical of Tesla's odds, of becoming a mainstream automaker?
Yeah, well, I wasn't an expert. I'm still not. I joined the Society of Automotive Engineers just to read about, I had to learn myself, what does it take to build a car? I remember attending conferences. I remember attending a conference one time, was it in battery technology? Did I tell this story in 16? Forgive me if I'm repeating myself.
No, repeat. I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, and I remember, well, first of all, we talked to Daimler and they said, Tesla has technology that nobody else has. So you kind of hang on to that, because if people who know what they're talking about are saying this, then you kind of have to weigh that against somebody else who maybe doesn't know what they're talking about, or someone who's supposed to, but they can't come up with a good reason why Tesla is not going to be able to do what Tesla says they were going to be able to do. Like, for example, I talked to some battery experts that worked for other types of companies. And I said, well, Tesla's claiming that they're going to be able to, produce batteries at this cost per kilowatt hour and using the cylindrical cell. And these experts, there was two of them, I remember, and they were both like, yeah, we just don't know what Tesla's talking about there. It's almost like they thought Tesla was lying. So then you're like, okay, well, either they're lying or these experts actually don't know. And so it's like, so I was an investigative reporter before I became a stock analyst. So it's like a similar skill set in some ways, because you're just investigating, really. You're like, you might have a thesis, like within stock analysis, you have a thesis, but you're not there's no foregone conclusion. Like you're not trying to, you're trying to disprove your thesis as much as you're trying to prove it. And so, if you keep just asking the question, pulling the strings and talking to experts, you do get to form your own opinion. And so the reason I had the conviction I had is because it was based on a really, strong work ethic and a deep level of research. That sort of investigative journalism skill set applied to financial analysis.
Mm-hmm. How confident were you back then that Tesla could ramp the Model 3 and become a mainstream automaker?
Well, thanks. You hit, because of this interview, I went and pulled open my old Tesla model and I pulled up my 2025 estimates. It's so funny. I had 2025 estimates. I had forgotten what they were. So I opened my file, which is a file that has not been opened since October 2016. So it's been a really long time. but I guess I would say I was confident enough to put my name to it. I think I had 1.6 million Model 3s by 2025. And if we look at kind of where they're tracking, it's like tracking. So I think I was pretty confident. I mean, I don't think I was overconfident, but I felt, pretty good about the research. And always, you always put, there's risks, right? So you always list the risks. It is a thesis. So I felt pretty good about it. And it's funny because I know that there was, just even, there was a situation where somebody's family member, an analyst, who said, make sure you're, not to me, but like to it, somebody else I worked with, like, make sure your name is never on a research report that's bullish on Tesla. You'll be very embarrassed one day, And so, I had to, put my name out there in a way where I knew there were people out there that were like literally counseling their own children, adult children, to like stay away from Andrea and her research. Like, you're going to be so embarrassed. So it's really interesting that it was a very interesting time. But I had been, like I said, I'd been a reporter before that. And so I'd been on the front page of the newspaper. Like, I was like, it was okay. It was going to be okay. And also and I said this when I left stock analysis, but I put the year my life expectancy runs out on my wall, which is like, I would always have the deathbed conversation. Like, am I going to regret this on my deathbed? Probably not. I probably won't even care. Okay. Have confidence, go forth.
That's awesome, man. So I'm wondering, the past 18 months, we've seen this crazy Tesla stock price jump, 10x. Did that surprise you at all? Like, I mean, it all was just compressed in this 18 months. We saw it just go from, I don't know, just a $50 billion company to, a $700 billion company or so. What were you thinking when you saw the stock price just continue to go up?
Oh, things, you're looking at a re-rating when you're watching it. I think the thing about re-ratings is like, they're going to come, but they're very hard to predict when and like what the catalyst might be. Because I think, pre-split, it went back down into the 400s last year, early in the year. And then it skyrocketed. So the stock re-rated. I think, in terms of surprised, I think I'm always surprised by re-ratings, just the timing on them. In general, even when I'm bullish on companies, forgive me on the sound here, even if I'm bullish on companies, it's just really hard to predict when a re-rating is going to happen. And in general, re-ratings tend to happen just like they always kind of, you're like, oh, we're in the middle of a re-rating, and it's actually when you need to buy shares, because if you sense you're in a re-rating, that's, it's going to settle in, and it might shoot up, and then it'll come back and settle into a little bit of a lower level off the highs, but it's re-rated. It won't go back to what it was.
Can you dive a bit deeper into your concept or how you view re-rating? Like, what's the background of a company, when it gets re-rated? Who is doing the re-rating? What's the impact, and why does the stock price do what it does?
Yeah. The re-ratings happen because some perception of the company's future success has become, cemented, just kind of more generally accepted among a wider group of investors. And so, that's just that's what happened with Tesla. And so everyone kind of acknowledges that, this is the new price. And, and then when companies, when they launch, follow-on offerings or they do capital raises, that's a pricing discovery event. And, it shows that investors are willing to buy the stock at that price. There's like sort of safety in numbers with the investment community, right? It's like, oh, well, because anything is only worth as much as somebody else is willing to pay for it, right? And so there's a little bit of a collective agreement on the new valuation, and it's not explicitly stated. It's not like anyone, says this, but you see it in the stock price. And so some bit of uncertainty was alleviated, and some future outcome was, generally judged to be more probable than it was before. That's the best. And there is sort of a group, it is sort of like a group thing. It's like the whole market has re-rated that stock, and it's now worth more. And that's some of it. Some is multiple expansion as well. I mean, we did have that in the last year with, all growth stocks have done pretty well. So there's some macro market conditions happening. And then there's some things specific to Tesla that happened. I think them becoming free cash flow positive was a big part of it. GAAP profitable, I mean, I think those were, key. I think the gross margins were pretty impressive last year. They achieved their target gross margin, 25%, like in the automotive business. That's a big deal. So I'm not sure, because I'm not, covering the stock, what it was that the market had doubts about that got sort of those doubts were retired. But some doubt was retired, I'm pretty sure.
All right. So here's a question from some of our my Twitter followers, and I've opened up kind of what they might want to ask you. And so we got Stephen Mark Ryan. He says, did Andrea interact with other analysts covering Tesla much? If so, what were they missing? Seems like she was the only analyst who got it in the early days.
I don't know if I interacted that deeply when I was covering the stock. I guess we were all competitors. Later on, I became, I went and worked for Tesla for a little bit doing investor relations, and I interacted with the analysts. I don't want to pine too much on the folks who used to be my competitors, and there were different folks who got it or didn't at different points. I'm not sure what motivated some of the research or some of the opinions. I did perceive that, particularly among automotive analysts, I think some of their opinions might have been formed by their industry contacts. And in general, that's usually a good thing. When you cover a bunch of competing companies, you kind of, I don't want to say play them off of each other, but in a way, because you're like, you can learn from one company what they have to say about their competitor. It makes you ask better questions. It will make you more skeptical, because companies are necessarily skeptical of their competitors. And so I think some of their skepticism came from that. I think I think if you viewed the company through a strictly automotive lens, especially on valuation, it just wasn't going to make sense. And you had to look at it from like if they had a tech company cost curve, not an industrial company cost curve. I was a disruptive technologies analyst and I covered tech. So it was just a little bit of a different viewpoint, covering growth. Also I was a growth analyst, covering growth stocks, which are different. They get valued differently. They're also growing a lot faster. It's also, an energy storage company. So Tesla didn't neatly slot into, any sort of buckets.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of the analysts, especially early on, they were, auto analysts. They were covering a lot of auto companies, and Tesla was one of those companies. And it seems like, the lens they had was, covering from the auto industry. From your perspective, you were covering, let's say, growth, tech, innovation. What other companies were you covering as an analyst during that time?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I covered so I covered a lot of aerospace and defense, actually, with a geospatial component. So GeoEye and Digital Globe, which ended up merging, and then Digital Globe was acquired. And actually have satellite launch poster just over here on my office wall from that. AeroVironment, which provided drones to the U.S. military. Stratasys, which made 3D printers. I did pick up the firearm stocks, which was really interesting. It was completely, but it was really interesting to me. So it was something that kind of fascinated me, and I wanted to dive deeper into it. I wanted to better understand sort of the firearms industry. So I covered them. I'm trying to think who else I covered at the time. I feel so bad. I might forget a few, but yeah. So like technologies where the existence of the technology means you have to have it. Oh, I covered Proto Labs. Actually, if you look through the Ark Invest fund, there's a bunch of them.
Yeah,
that I used to cover. Proto's another one.
As you're talking, I'm like, Stratasys, yeah, Proto Labs. Like a lot of this sounds like a typical type of Ark Invest type of company. Do you think? I mean, do you have any opinions on Ark Invest? Is that one of the reasons why they're able to catch Tesla, because they are looking at it through tech, innovation, disruption, rather than a typical like legacy auto lens?
Yeah, I think they're definitely outside the box thinkers at Ark, and they have a lot of resources to research things. I personally I run my personal holdings. I'm like, oh, it's good to know if Ark owns it. I think it's not a bad strategy. So yeah, I think I like the way they think. I like the way they think about things. They do think big picture. I think stock analysis is a mixture of the macro picture, which you want to get right, but you also need to get the details right as well. So they do a lot of big picture thinking. I think a lot of stock analysis, just where I was on the sell side, was a lot of just tracking the day to day. Like if I were an analyst this year, I would be on Tesla. So much of the research would be about, their progress with expanding their manufacturing, right, in Berlin and Texas. You want to see that they're ramping their capacity. I'd probably have questions about why the energy storage business is not ramping faster. I think it grew, double check me on this, like 80% last year, which is great numbers, but like, why is it not going faster? Like, what's the constraint there? It seems like there's a lot more demand for energy storage, especially to offset peaker plants than they can produce. So like, why doesn't that go faster? What are the constraints? Like, I don't actually know that now because I don't cover the company. So I think so much of your day-to-day is actually just researching the near term. And of course, all of that will roll up into a long-term picture, but it's really your conviction in the near term that kind of keeps you on the straight and narrow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned your 2025 model. Can you share anything about kind of what you are modeling? This is probably like, almost 5 years ago. Yeah, would love to see if...
Yeah, I'm gonna... So I have it on... So I literally had to boot up, and Zoom's gonna like edit this computer out, which is kind of interesting.
Sure.
But yeah, I have it on this old machine that I haven't booted up in so long. And so I actually booted up before this interview because it literally like takes like 5 minutes to boot. It's this older piece. It's like more than 5 years old. And so anyway, so like I said, I opened this file for the first time in 5 years. And in one of my tabs, I do have my 2025 estimates. So here's what I said. The global market size for vehicles in the $35,000 to $60,000 price point was 5 million units. And so the prediction was that Tesla would have 32% market share by 2025 in that category, which is 1.6 million units in 2025 of the Model 3 or the Y variant, whatever it was, any variant that had an ASP of about $45,000. I also had the S and X platform, about 150,000 units by 2025 at the $95,000 price point. And that would have represented 15% market share in that target category. And that all rolled up to automotive revenue of $86 billion in 2025 at a 25% gross margin. And so if you look at where they're tracking, where are they tracking? In 2020, they did automotive revenue of what?
It's a little less than 25%, I think. Yeah.
27 billion, it looks like. So, and I had 86 billion in 5 years. So they would have to more than double that in the next 5 years. And this is why you want to track production, right? You want to track, in order to get their units up, they've got to build capacity. And then the other thing you want to look at is how they fund capacity. And again, I'm not doing any of this work, but this is where the work would go if I were doing it.
Yeah.
That's what you really want to track. Are they going to be able to keep growing and sustaining the growth numbers?
Yeah. Did you have any numbers on kind of a next generation, a cheaper car than the Model 3?
No.
Yeah.
But I did do an energy business assumption, Powerwall units and power pack, and how many kilowatt hours of battery packs produced for vehicles and for storage. I'm just looking at that. And so the energy storage business, I estimated revenue of it looks like 3 billion in 2025. And I don't know if you have in front of you, they might already be bigger than that.
Yeah, they might be around there actually, for 2020.
Yeah, so 3 billion, although I think there's a lot of room there. And so, I did have a sum of the parts price target on the auto business and on the energy storage business. And again, I published this in April of 2016.
Yeah.
So, wow. Yeah, 5 years ago. So, and it was a look at 2025.
Yeah.
So, and I have all kinds of notes to myself, which if you have questions, I'm happy to
Yeah.
like look through my file and look at what I have
Yeah.
to refresh my memory.
I'm curious. I know you've referred in the past to your research with like kind of the different parts or that go into the car when you were researching Tesla early on. How did you find that information? Like, how did you find out how much different parts of the car? Did you have to call up suppliers, or were there different research reports that you just kind of accessed, or what was kind of the resources
Yeah, I mean,
available?
I think there's the parts that matter the most. Like the lithium ion battery cell. You can look up what goes into like a cylindrical cell. I mean, that's like common knowledge. It's out there. Tesla had its own special flavor of everything, but it's like some of this is just sort of standard knowledge. You can Google cylindrical cell and see all the components of a cylindrical cell. So it's not like that information is not really easily available, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Mm. Like how were you able to track like how fast Tesla would be able to reduce the cost of certain parts? And if so, like how were you able to do that in your research?
Ooh, no. I mean, and even in recent years, the company, they do their own presentations on this.
Hmm.
So some of that would come from the company
Hmm.
itself, them talking about what they were able to do and when. There is an element of trust there. Um, you know, you're not allowed to, everything you say should be lawyered as a public company. So I think, you can trust some of the company's um, data points on that.
Mm. When you after you left being an analyst, you went into coaching directly, or did you go into part-time, I guess, consulting for Tesla IR? Which one was
I
first?
did for a
Okay.
little bit, and then I had my second child, and then I went to Axon, the company I'm at now, to run investor relations in September 2017. I've been here since.
Okay. What can you tell us about investor relations? Like you've worked as an analyst, you've worked, you know, helping Tesla, but also now leading a publicly traded company in Axon. You've also been a retail investor in a company as well. So you've seen all angles. Um, like, do institutional investors, do analysts get kind of extra information, any special treatment? Or is it just the same information as companies, or do they just get more clarification? Like what is kind of that from a retail investor point of view, who, let's say, who doesn't know too much about investor relations, like what is the role of investor relations?
Yeah, so those are a couple different questions, but I'll try to tackle them. Um, you know, and I actually just today I was on the closing bell and my face was up in Times Square because I won the our investor relations team won best overall investor relations for mid cap company from IR magazine, which was really exciting. So
Congrats.
that was really nice. And Axon won that, and so that felt really great. So investor relations, there's so much of it. It marries, you have to understand your company's business model. You're forming relationships with your investors, institutional as well as retail. Although in terms of individual, like you have it, companies have millions of shares outstanding. You can't have a conversation with every single individual. Companies have really robust disclosure requirements already. And then, like our company now, I think we go above and beyond what's like legally required to disclose. So, we have a mantra, our insides match our outsides. And so it's all about helping investors to make an investment decision in the company. And that doesn't mean, your job in investor relations is not to get people to buy the stock. Like that's really not your role. Your role is to transparently present the company, help bring context to conversations, give context on what the story is about, what the company's about, how the company's management team thinks about certain decisions, and how they apply decision making. If confronted with X, they might apply this way of decision making to that problem. And then helping the investors to understand the market. In terms of retail specifically, I'm really proud. Like we do a shareholder letter every quarter. We do a video. We make our transcripts available online. Like the company I work for now, investor.axon.com. So you can go pull the transcript, you don't need a Bloomberg subscription. We now put all of our Section 16 officers on Zoom calls for earnings. So you can see our faces, you can get to know the company in a more like sort of like, face-to-face type way where you didn't get before with the audio only. But there's a lot that we do in investor relations. I mean, it's a big job. I actually really enjoy it. I enjoy the relations part of it too, like forming relationships with shareholders, many of whom, I mean, Wall Street is not that big of a world, on the institutional side of things. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think more or less.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So I've got one question that keeps on coming up from viewers, and this is like the number one question I get after our past interview 5 years ago. So here's Hans Nelson on Twitter. He says, "How much of what Andrea saw on the second floor of the Tesla factory that brought her to tears can she discuss now?" So yeah, I get this question in different forms. It just really left an impact on so many people. Like the story is you went to, Tesla, was it the Fremont factory?
Yeah. They were starting to let people up there, and
Yeah.
it's such a great. So I'm trying to think back. So they would have been doing powertrain manufacturing up there. So there were robots, putting the cells into place. They're wrapping thermal management around every single cell. That's automated. So they had these like giant glass boxes of robots. I think they were KUKA robots that were trained. And I don't know if it was KUKA specifically on the battery pack manufacturing. Don't quote me on that one. So they had the robots. But then the other thing is even to make sort of the powertrain and the motor, machines didn't exist to build those parts. Like they had to build the machine to make it. And they couldn't source the parts either because they were the first company. When you're the first to do something and you've designed something new from the ground up, there's no supplier you can phone and source that part. Not only that, you can't even source the machine to make the part. Do you see what I'm saying? So it was like not only understanding that there's these parts and like and they're really pushing the limit on automotive engineering, but then you can't even procure the machine to make the part in mass at scale. And I believe some of the Roadster battery packs were made it was very manual. So they had to automate all of that for the Model S. So it was really just that. I mean, it was just this fact of, like you'd go and they'd be like, well, we couldn't source this and we couldn't source this and we couldn't source this. And then our engineers ran into this problem and they had to solve this. And then they ran into this problem and then they had to solve this. And then they had to build this machine. And like, so they not only had to engineer the parts, then they had to engineer the machines to make the parts. Mm-hmm. And then when they couldn't get suppliers to even make the parts to the machines, to the parts that went on the machines, then they had to make those as well. And then even then the way they would just work with their suppliers to try to get supply on some of this. I just thought it was very interesting that how it all been built from the ground up. And if anybody was going to sort of copy that, it was like clear that they had been working on this in some capacity in stealth for, months to years. Tesla just tends to work very, very fast. But there was a lot of ground that they have covered to produce the Model S.
Yeah, I've done several factory tours in the early days, and I remember like the first floor, they're just like showing you everything, and you're going around seeing the assembly and the body in white and all that. But like there's always like the second floor, and then that's off limits. They're not letting people. Then you always hear special people get access, to the occasional, very rare second floor tour of. And I always took it as like they had really invested a lot into like the pack assembly. Like the robots and the process to really get it where it's automated fully, and that's something that they felt like they put a lot into it, and they weren't ready to show it to the world, and publicly. It was kind of like something they were keeping close to their chest. And I kind of wonder if some of that led to this whole, new battery production effort from Tesla, where they purchased kind of companies like Hybar and others that were able to build these machines, and now they're making cells, right? And I wonder if part of the early genesis of Tesla making cells was in that second floor, of Fremont, where they were really testing out all of the equipment to quickly, just make it. Like, how fast were the cells being like put into the packs?
Um, I don't know what the rate was, like how many cells per. I mean, it was like zoop, 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 kind of like at that speed.
Got it.
That's my very
Yeah, that
technical
makes
way of
sense.
saying
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no,
it.
definitely. It definitely sounds like the early stages of Tesla cell production. Yeah, getting the first,
It's like,
machines going.
it was just, and I guess they had a bunch of glass cages where this was happening. It was just really, it was just like, I don't mean to sound like, I don't want to blow, I didn't mean to blow it up to more than it was. It was just like, I didn't think at that point the world knew sort of what was coming. And, um, there's just, if you look at like the performance stats on the Model S Plaid and how it compares to other performance cars, like clearly they still have a superior technology lead. There's just so much you can do with an electric car. And I think the reason why others aren't doing it is because there's just so many problems to solve to build those cars profitably at scale. There's just a lot of engineering that has to go into not just engineering the car, but engineering the factory to make the car.
Hmm. Yeah. So after you left being an analyst, you I believe you ended up buying some Tesla stock yourself, also getting a Model X. Did the
Yes.
Model X, owning a Model X, did that help you understand the company any more than you did before?
Yes. My appreciation for what Tesla was doing was probably a little bit more theoretical. Like, I'd driven the car. I thought it was really cool. Um, I have a newfound appreciation for the electric vehicle revolution. I thought I got it, but I didn't get it until I got the car. Because, there's so many things. There's just so many things people don't even think about with zero emissions. Also, just the way you drive the car is so fun. Like when you go downhill and it recharges the battery, it's such a different, it goes into green. Do you have a Tesla?
Yeah, yeah,
It goes into green when
yeah.
you go downhill. It's just so cool. I mean, we actually drive it. We try to game how much range we can get out of it. It's like playing a video game. I just with my kids and husband, we went out hiking on the Olympic Peninsula. I live in Seattle over the weekend, and we drove out to the Olympic Peninsula and came back. And it said when we left we were going to come back with 9% battery by the time we arrived home round trip. And we're like, okay, that's cutting it close. And we got home with like 30% battery. It's like, yeah, it's like you played the game right. You coasted down the hills and recharged and use that regenerative braking, and like it's just like, I don't know why, but that's so fun. And then the other thing I think is that I really came to appreciate having a car that doesn't give off exhaust, and you never have to go to a gas station. Like I tweeted about this, but my kids, like I had to explain to them, hey, if you're in a garage with an internal combustion engine car and the door is closed, like you will die. And it's like, this is something that my kids don't even understand or know about now, because of course we have the car on with the garage door closed. There's just, it's almost like we're taking it for granted now that we have an electric car. So there's just so much to love about the EV revolution. I mean, there's just so much. So I'm just really grateful the company exists. And I'm glad they made the Model X. I asked that on an earnings call way back in the day, like, why are you going to make the Model X? Do you even have to? Sorry if this question is sacrilege. And I think they said on the call, like, this is a product that should exist. And I'm really glad the Model X exists.
Yeah, definitely. Trader Deb says, where Tesla is now versus your ideas back some time? Have some of them exceeded, lagged, surprised, or disappointed? I think the gist of the question is, when you had expectations, let's say as an analyst, has Tesla in some areas exceeded, and in other areas lagged? Which are those things that you think, maybe Tesla surprised you versus, didn't?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think they're on track. I mean, they're scaling their manufacturing. This year is the year that the Semi comes out, right? This is so exciting. I think the Cybertruck was a really pleasant surprise. I think they kind of just broke the mold with that one. I think it's going to be successful. I tweeted that at the time. I think every single like handyman or sort of duty worker type person, like in the trades, they're going to want one of these. I think they're just really tough cars. So I think that's really cool. And I think you'll be able to park it on the street in the city and just not worry. I mean, there's a lot of security in that, right? So I think that's going to be exciting. I think the semi is going to be really exciting. I mean, neither of those were things that, we had predicted in our research back then. So I think those things are really, really exciting. I'm trying to think of if anything like, I think 2018 was dicey. I think everybody knows and admits that. I think that was a dicey time. I think the Model 3 ramp was more precarious than I had expected it would be. So that was tough, just even myself owning the stock during that time was tough. So yeah, I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but I think it definitely, that was tough. They bet the company on that vehicle. Yeah. And I don't think they're ever going to do that again. I think that was the bet the company vehicle. And I guess I don't know if I realized back in 2016 that the company, they would get so close to the edge trying to bring the Model 3 to market. Like, I think I thought it was more sort of buttoned up than it had been. But they did it, they pulled through it. And that's what you got on, is that, companies can pull through things.
How close to the edge do you think they got? I mean, some people, Elon is saying like, they really were maybe several weeks, a few months from bankruptcy. Other people are saying like, Tesla could always have gotten cash or capital from the capital markets. It wasn't like, the capital markets were frozen at that time. They could have raised some money. I mean, what are your thoughts? Like, how close were they really, to the brink?
I mean, I don't know, because I wasn't covering the company at the time. I was like a shareholder and a customer. I was just watching.
Well, like most people, yeah.
So I just wasn't that close to it. I looked at the financials, and it's like, okay, they had to get their deliveries out and get the cash in, right? I mean, they just had a cash flow problem. Could they have raised more capital? Yes, but then it's like, do you want to get that close to the brink? Then you always kind of have that kind of hanging over you. I mean, I could see why there was a lot of reluctance to, do that. I think also people don't want to go out and raise capital potentially at a lower valuation than a previous raise. And I'm not speaking to that Tesla specifically, because I don't remember when their most recent raise had been at that point. But it just seemed really dicey. Elon was sleeping on the factory floor or whatever in the conference room. I mean, it's just like, this is like, that just felt like it was really intense. I remember thinking, like, if I lived close by, I'd be bringing sandwiches to the factory workers. Like, I think there was a lot of heart. Like, everybody wanted to see Tesla succeed, Yeah.
I call that like 2018-19 as like the shadow of the valley of death. It's just like, it's a rough time, to go through for everybody. Did that test you at all in terms of your view of the company, of, there's a lot of drama that went on during those couple, 2008, early 2019.
Yeah, I think for me, I was just like, oh, I'm not going to be able to retire on my Tesla stock. Okay, that's fine. I'll just keep working. And now it's worked out and it's great. But sure, I think it tested everybody. I think it tested long holders. I talked to, I work for a company now, and people will call me and ask me about Tesla. I'm like, no, did you want to talk about the company I work for? I thought you wanted to talk about my company. Like, oh, we want to talk about Tesla. I'm like, okay, but I don't cover the company. Like, so it was just, I think there was a lot of attention on that, and I'm just really glad they pulled through it. And now we're going to get into this is the year of the Tesla Semi. I'm excited. I think we're just moving on, but I guess no great story is without its drama.
Yeah, I hear you. Joseph Kim says, do you see any other Tesla-like companies emerging with a fantastic founder, a crazy big total addressable market, or a new trend now talked about openly? Are there any exciting companies? I know you're at a company that you believe strong in, right? Axon. Are there any companies that
it sounds like you all want to give me you want me to give you the next 100 bagger.
Well, actually, I'm just on a constant journey myself to explore. So, that's the context.
What's the next 100 bagger? Yeah. I think what you do, here's what I think. If there's a formula, I don't think there is one, but if there's a formula, I think you see, like, what major problems are there out there in the world? Who's attempting to solve them? could this solution actually work? Where's the next massive value creation going to happen? And then I think an important concept here is value creation versus value capture. So, companies will create a certain amount of value for society. It's like they're creating value. And then what the shareholders get, the revenue and all that is value capture. So you want to see a company that can create massive amounts of value and be able to capture some of it, or a large portion of it, not all of it, because society will benefit, And so that's really what you want to think about. Like, what are some of the big problems that society faces, and who's tackling that, and who's going to maybe help solve them.
Mm-hmm. That's great. You mentioned the 100-bagger. I mean, it's a rare, there are 100-baggers out there. It's just more of a rare thing, right? To see a 100-bagger where you can get in as a publicly traded company and still do 100, X on a stock. With Robotaxi and autonomous driving, it seems like, there could be potential to do another 10X, which would make it a 1,000-bagger. And it's something like in the early days, like it just seems like it wasn't something that Elon was completely aware of. Let's say in 2012 or 2013, like autonomous driving wasn't like in the first master plan. Analysts didn't talk about it. Is that something that is kind of surprising at all to you, to see this whole new field of AI, machine learning, autonomous driving, robotaxis? Yeah, just curious of what your thoughts kind of, when you.
I covered, you asked what companies I covered. I also covered Mobileye back then. And Tesla had worked with them for a little bit. Only autonomous driving, they've been since acquired. But so I did cover the autonomous driving space. And, I know advances in machine learning make all of that easier. I mean, my perception is that the ecosystem around Tesla, the analysts, the media, Twitter, talks more about autonomous than Tesla talks about autonomous. I mean, I know Tesla's excited about autonomous, and I know they talk about it, but I think their focus, I think they do want to get it working. And I don't want to speak for the company because I have not talked to anybody at Tesla in a while. So I'm not speaking for the company, but my perception is that, they're really focused on scaling their manufacturing. Yes, they want to get to full self-driving, but there's a lot of other things they have going on right now. They need to scale their manufacturing. They need to open up these new manufacturing centers in different parts of the world. They need to grow the Shanghai manufacturing. They're expanding into China. Like, they're bringing new products to market. They're completely refreshing the S and the X. And that doesn't mean that full self-driving doesn't matter. And I think it is interesting, and it's this longer term thing that may change human behavior yet again. But my perception is that the ecosystem around Tesla talks more about full self-driving and autonomous than Tesla itself talks about it, which makes me think that I don't know if there's a disconnect there. I wonder sometimes if there's a disconnect there. There's an expectation that, I guess I don't understand really what's getting baked into the expectations at this point on that topic.
Yeah. I mean, a large part of it is Elon keeps on teasing full self-driving. He keeps on tweeting about it, how they're so close
but isn't it
to solving it.
Look, I think in 2020, we've had a massive shift to remote work and hybrid work. I think we're going to move to a hybrid work environment. Most tech companies are going to have some sort of hybrid situation. So we're seeing this sort of redistribution of where work is done. So commuting itself is going to necessarily change. So then you combine that with sort of this automated driving and robotaxi, and the world could be looking dramatically different in even 3 years than it looks today. I think the world today looks different than it did 2 years ago in ways that not everybody would have predicted. The sheer amount of Zoom calls that we're doing, for instance. I think in 3 years, the world's going to look different again in ways that you can have high conviction that it's going to look really different, and have medium to low conviction in what exact ways it's going to be different.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of segue into kind of some more of your just non-Tesla kind of personal thoughts and story. You tweeted a while back saying, "My personal impetus is to grind, outworking nearly everyone I knew. Probably came from being orphaned young." That's another story. I was very hungry. Sometimes you can spin trauma into gold. We had another Twitter follower just ask kind of more about your personal kind of history, and I had emailed you asking if you're open to discuss, some of your past. I thought it's really interesting. I've had, a lot of kind of history with kind of orphans. I spent a good 4 years in Asia, just really like um, establishing very close relationships with orphans, and so that's really close to my heart. And I'm just really curious to hear like how do you connect kind of your past and how you've dealt with your past to you know to make it to turn it to positive. And so, as much as you want to go into it, but yeah, um, what can you share about that?
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, so this isn't something I talk about a ton, but I have tweeted about it, so it's totally fair game. Yeah, so I was placed into foster care as a little baby, and I was placed with a foster couple, like an older couple, retired couple. My dad served in World War II. My mother was a housewife. My mom was born in 1927. My dad was born in 1921. They had lived through the Great Depression. So here I was, this baby from in the 1980s, and I was placed with this old couple. And they ended up adopting me out of foster care. And so I had a wonderful childhood, and I was raised by not only my mom and her husband, my mom and dad, but my aunts and uncles. And so there was this entire generation of elderly people who raised me. Um, and sadly, over the course of my teenage years, every single one of them began to die off. And so I kind of lost everyone in a large way. And it was really horrible. So my parents died about a year apart. So I was orphaned at 13. I went to go live with some family members. But, I really think like I've been on my own emotionally since I was 13, and I've been on my own financially since I was 18. And that's hard. It's really hard. Like I think foster kids would tell you it's hard to age out of the foster care system. I think the reality of my life is that I have never had a financial safety net, as well as an emotional safety net. And I think that, I was either going to, I don't want to say home. I was definitely, I could have ended up homeless, but here's what I would say. Having food insecurity and housing insecurity, I think, is under the bell curve of probability for every human. And it was probably closer to the more probable end of the bell curve for me than it would be for a lot of people with a more secure upbringing. So, I mean, I had a lot of motive and incentive to just work really hard to try to get out of that situation and make something of myself. And, now I have my own children. I mean, it's just going to be very different for them. So I'm proud of what I've done. It was not easy. I did it often at the expense of my own health. I don't think you climb out of those circumstances and not have scars to show for it. So I definitely have my scars, and I have had to do a lot of healing, personal healing. I don't want to paint a rosy picture because it was very hard. So I have a lot of empathy for people who've suffered trauma, who've had to go through deep, deep grief and healing, which I have. I feel very healed now, but it's been a long journey. And some of it's been simultaneous to my career. That those have been two journeys at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. You shared another kind of story on Twitter a while back. Um, you had some, was it cousins, I believe, who, um, I guess a relative or a close relative passed away, and
My cousin died.
yeah,
Yeah.
you weren't able to make it, but you're able to gift them some Tesla shares, and
Yeah.
you're just really hoping that that could be the beginning of generational wealth. Um, and you kind of go on and say you do appreciate the democratization of wealth creation offered by the stock market. Relationships and health matter more, but money sure does help. How do you view relationships, health, and money? Like, can you have it all, or does it somehow, conflict? I mean, like, yeah, what's your kind of take on everything?
Yeah, so this was just me speaking on, behalf of myself, not my company or opinions or anything like that. But I do think having had different levels of personal access to financial resources, at some level, money really does help it even helps your relationships. Um, if you are expending a lot of brain power, if you're at the grocery store, adding everything up and worrying about what you buy and trying to shop sales, like that's just a lot of energy and it's a lot of mental bandwidth that like every poor person deals with. I've dealt with it. And I think people who have never been there don't understand. Um, and that weighs on you. I mean, because you only have so much energy in a 24-hour period. Um, and so the more you have to worry about money, the less mental bandwidth you have to deal with other things. So I do think there is, and studies have shown, I think it's like 70 or 80,000 a year in annual income. Like money actually increases your happiness. And then beyond that, it doesn't. I do think you get to a place in life, or at least if you can, and it'd be wonderful if everybody could get there, where there's a trade-off between time and money, where where you realize that time is your more valuable commodity. That at least that's been my journey. And then you're solving for time, because you do get to a point where you wouldn't even accept X amount more to work more. You would actually pay that to spend more time with your children or with your family. Or to have good health, to be able to have a good night's sleep, stuff like that. So I do think, I mean, obviously we're made to be relational humans. We're relational creatures. Our relationships matter so much to us. I think friendship is also just like a really amazing, like it's sometimes undervalued in Western culture. I think friendships, I think that we tend to put a lot of weight on the marriage and the parent-child relationship, but like in our work relationships, like take a lot of primacy. But I think maintaining your friendships into old age is like super important. I think it's like super important to your well-being and health and wellness. So I think relationships matter a lot. Obviously, I think this is obvious stuff. And then health, health is interesting because, some of it is just, the genetic lottery, and then some of it is lifestyle choice. And so how do you kind of maximize the genes that you were given, right? I think, what's the thing that the scientists and doctors say? It's your genes load the gun, your environment pulls the trigger. So I know even with myself, with my own health, just living a healthier lifestyle, reducing my stress, getting a good night's sleep has led to like dramatic improvements in my personal health.
Mhm. Yeah, I struggle sometimes. Like I've gone through kind of my own journey of being really, really poor. There was a time like in my 20s where I had like less than a couple dollars in the bank, and actually I had almost nothing in it. I couldn't withdraw anything, and I didn't have money for lunch, so friends had to buy me lunch a lot, and I didn't have like a quarter to ride a bus. And I remember staying at the bus station, not having a quarter and not even owning enough to find a quarter, like really just being at the rock bottom. And then just walking away from the bus station, not to find a quarter, but because I just didn't have access to a quarter, like that type of like really just rock. I wouldn't say bottom. There's obviously, in a way, like money is relative. There's always probably going to be a worse off person. But for me at that time, that was like, a pit of despair. And when I reflect on it, though, it feels like it's opened up a world, a door of empathy, where I connect
Mm.
with so many people in the world through that type of experience. Um, and I've also had a somewhat traumatic kind of childhood myself, being abused, etc. But that also opened up a different door of empathy, where it's like there's something about the other side of unfortunate pain or suffering or lack that seemed to open up doors of common human experience, or make us realize we're just all the same, in the same
Yes.
boat or something. And sometimes I struggle with this idea that, money could be it's like the end all, like it's going to solve all of your problems. When I see on one side, as you're sharing, like it's tremendously valuable, like money, because like for those who don't have money, who are struggling like day in and day out, it could be definitely a life changer, for a family, for a generation, etc. I can't understate that. But then on the other side, sometimes when our whole focus becomes just that, and we can get successful, sometimes that can bring us away perhaps from that common, I don't know, connection with
Yeah.
those from the places where we were before, do you ever think about stuff like that, like just, I mean, the tension,
Yes. I think that there are some lessons that I want to say, I don't like to say only statements that only can be learned through suffering. Maybe they can be learned in other ways. I think it's a lot harder to learn them. Sort of had a moment a couple years ago where for the first time I was thankful for my life experiences. And it was up to me to come to that, because if anyone else said to me, you need to be thankful, that was inappropriate. I have a mantra: grief before gratitude. Sometimes people need to grieve and they don't want you to put this toxic positivity on them. Like, people need to grieve. Like this last year with COVID, there's a lot, people have lost a lot. Like, we need to grieve before we're forced to be grateful. Once we fully grieved our losses, I think gratitude comes a lot more naturally. But I had this moment where I had a bunch of friends who, every single friend I had was going through something hard. And every single one of those friends was saying, this is the hardest thing I've ever been through. And they were all different things. And I had been through every single one of those things in my life. And I was like, how do I have this giant amount of rocks, these hard things? And like, this is the hardest thing you've ever been through. And that's like one of my 5, and it just, I'm laughing, but it was like, and I was just crying. And I remember realizing, like, I am so thankful I've had these experiences, because I can relate to my friends and I can love them. And like, I also know I'm going to be okay. And that's been a tremendous gift.
Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes I feel like getting through some of that hardship and what you kind of latch onto, whether it be the courage or the hope or the wisdom or people, relationships, the things that you learn and the person that you become oftentimes through the most hardships, the
But I think,
hardest of hardships,
so here's the thing. I think that in hindsight is very, very much true. I think that when someone's going through hell, sometimes there's not a silver lining in the moment. And even for years later, there's no silver lining. Some things that happen just really fucking suck. And it just sucks. And I think that's important to acknowledge, because I think sometimes we want to leapfrog to the silver lining. Oh yeah, you went through all this shit, but here's the silver lining. Like, no, I'm not grateful I lost my parents at age 12 and 13. I'm not grateful that I had my children. I had no mother there to help me. I'm not grateful that my mom is missing out on so much in my life. I will never be thankful for that. That's always going to be a loss for me. So I am grateful that I have a lot of empathy for grief. I think I understand grief in a big way. But I'm not grateful for my losses in an explicit sense. Maybe if that makes sense. I guess maybe I'm both. I'm grateful and not grateful. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, from like, this is completely off topic probably, but yeah, the way I try to make sense of it too is like, trauma, abuse, suffering, like that stuff. I'm definitely like it. I don't see much positive in those things. There's events and, but what I am grateful about is somehow in the bigger picture, in the process, somehow I was fortunate to be connected with enough courage, with enough wisdom, with enough somehow, guidance, somehow where I was able to overcome and process and to, come out the other end. And that's kind of what I'm grateful. And the person that, I've been able to become through that process, so it's kind of, definitely don't wish any of that suffering on anyone. But
But I'm sure it informs you as a parent as well, and right, and how
yeah,
you show up as a human in the world.
yeah, no, I'm so thankful because like it opens my heart to, just to everyone, and it's changed my life, as a parent, to completely embrace, my kids as precious and valuable as they are. What about SpaceX? So I noticed your tweets. Sometimes you're like, I can't stop crying watching a SpaceX launch. Like, what's going on? Like, you know, um, Is it
Yeah,
sadness or is it happiness? Is
no, it's
it
so funny. I
excitement?
know it's so funny. I have like I cry tears of joy all the time. Like so I'm like very in touch with my like tears
Uh,
of joy. Like I am actually very poignantly moved by great acts of humanity. Like it just I mean, I just feel it so much. I think because I sometimes see the connectedness of all things. So when you watch a SpaceX launch, there's so much meaning in it. It's humanity like pushing forward in spite of it all. But then it's also like the work of team and the work of a visionary leader. And there's so much that it takes to bring it together for that one launch. And so all of that, the blood, sweat, and tears that it took to get to that moment, like I see that in that moment of the launch. And it just, and then when I think about how, you know, people said like it couldn't be done, you couldn't land the rockets. They told Elon it couldn't be done, and now they're doing it. Just that absolute defiance of it can't be done. It's like, well, I'm going to do it, you know. And the fact that there's so many people who made it didn't do it, like it just blows me away. And
mhm.
I just feel so happy. And so it really is tears of joy, but also tears of just being moved. I'm just so moved by the humanity of it. And I love when SpaceX produces things and they produce it and their production quality is really good. So you get to just watch at home and feel like you're part of it. Um, and it's really exciting. And they'll cut to the room, to the command center, and all the employees are cheering. And when you just see the looks on their faces, I'm just like so happy for them. And so, yeah, it's very emotional. Do you get emotional watching the SpaceX launches?
um, I get excited about like the launches. I showed my kids and they're super excited. When I get emotional, like the time I got emotional was when Tesla was, you know, accepted or made it into the S&P 500. Like something about that, it is similar to what you're talking about, where it's just years and years of the doubt and the naysayers and the haters saying like you can't do it, it's impossible, and just all of the resistance against, you know, like here's a person in a company just trying to do good. You know, they're trying to contribute in a very significant way for the future of humanity and our world, and they get so much slack for it. You know, it's just endless pain over and over. You know, people saying you can't do it, and then people betting against them, you know, trying to make their life hard. And you see this year in, year out, and then finally, like the story changes and they're forced now the masses, the public has to accept, you know, the reality that this company and the founder has defied all odds and has done what, you know, almost everyone thought was impossible, but did something that was noble in a sense, like for the greater good of humanity, right? And that type of, you know, story is just like, I think it's lost sometimes, you know, where we think it's just a company or it's just a stock or it's just cars or something. But I think what you're, you know, touching on with SpaceX is no, this is actually a bigger, you know, something bigger is happening here. This is this isn't just, you know, people trying to launch a rocket, but they're trying to do something so big, so grand, and it's for humanity. And these people and the team and all the workers are just pouring out all of their energy, all of their creativity into this thing, all depending all dependent on whether or not this rocket is going to make it or not. All eyes focused on that, you know. And it's this super significant event that, you know, it's emotional. Yeah, it's amazing. And I
Yeah,
totally get it.
it's my I'm not I don't know if you're a sports fan. I'm not really. I wish I think I can't handle it because of the ups and downs. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is too much for me. I get too attached to the players, but
Yeah.
it is kind of like that's how I think sports does that for a lot of people. Like they get to ride those emotional up and downs with the players. They get really into it. That's not me, but I think in some ways SpaceX is kind of like it's like rooting for your team in a way, you know.
Yeah.
Feels
Makes,
good.
yeah. Makes sense. Um, so you've also tweeted and shared about this concept of kind of non-dualism, non-binary, kind of both and third path thinking. So a path that reconciles seemingly opposing viewpoints. So it seems like something that you really hold on to, you find value in, you think that's useful. Can you explain kind of what this non-binary kind of thinking is and how it's been helpful for you?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's helpful in all walks of life. I also think there's truth in non-dualism. I think that is the truth. In order for something to be true, it has to hold its opposites. Um, it also allows room. It's more inclusive of all types of people, I feel like. I don't think the world is as black and white as we want to paint it. And there's so many examples of that. Um, like I think I tweeted about my current company. I used to study the firearms industry. I got to know a lot of folks in the firearms industry. The Second Amendment right to own firearms. There's this big debate, and so much of the debate is we need more guns, we need fewer guns, more guns, fewer guns. And I actually remember feeling kind of helpless, like, where's the path forward? Like, these things are pointing in opposite directions. And so, now I work for the company that makes the taser, and the whole idea is no, let's have less lethal weapons. So, the whole idea is, our CEO and founder, two of his friends were killed in a road rage incident and by guns. And his whole thing was like, well, why is it when we want to stop someone from coming at us, the only tool we have is to put a metal ball through that person? Could killing be a technology problem? And I think ultimately it's a problem of the human heart in some ways. But like even, in some cases, really, it's, if you look at when lethal force might be justified in a certain situation, there's not a good enough tool. Similar with our military checkpoints in other countries, and somebody's coming at the military checkpoint, and the only tool you have, you don't know if this person is a suicide bomber or they're just, just a mom asking for help. And so, but your only tool to deal with a potential threat is a firearm. And so it's not the best tool for every situation, right? And so I thought the taser device was like this, it was like this great, like, third path thinking, like, we're not even going to have this debate. We're just going to, like, so like it's a third path, and the third path sort of reconciles the two, which is like, well, maybe if we stop arguing about this and we could all agree on like this, and that's one example. I think I've used Tesla as another example about, with the internal combustion engine, you've got, emissions versus performance, right? And so it's like you either pollute more and you have performance, the car performs better, or you pollute less and the car doesn't perform. Well, like, this is this horrible trade-off. Like, what if we can just reconcile this and you can have more performance and zero emissions? It's like Model S Plaid, and so so those are product examples. But I think even in our personal lives, I think I tweeted about I wanted to nurse my babies. I also have a career that involves a lot of travel. And this was this binary. And then I was like, no, I'm going to bring the baby on all my trips. I want both. I want both. And I want a nurse, and I want the job with all the travel. Okay. So I'm going to travel with my infant. And I know that's a very privileged thing to say, but everything, you think of something where things seem, if you even think of anything now, David, where two things are pointing against each other, is there an idea that reconciles both points of view?
Yeah. Actually, I think about stuff like this all the time. So artificial general intelligence or singularity, to you, like, this seems like, in some ways, if you look at it from a black and white, binary approach, this is either a huge problem, where, singularity can ultimately wipe out or be very destructive, devastating to the human race. Or other people take the flip side, right? And they say, hey, this is going to be fantastic for humanity and open up tons of productivity and free time, and we'll reap the benefits of artificial general intelligence. And it seems so divided. Do you have any ideas on how this stuff can be reconciled?
So what's the both and there? That it's a giant risk to humanity and also a potential benefit.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you another example. So, there's, with technology, you have a lot of optimists who come from tech type of backgrounds, et cetera, saying, oh, technology is the answer. But on the flip side, you could look at it and say, well, is technology really making things better? Is it improving the wealth gap? Is it really making societies more stable? Is it helping democracy? You can look at certain societies and you say, hey, they're using technology against their own citizens by tracking, surveilling, collecting data. And you can look at some of the stuff and you go, wait a minute, where is this headed? Are we headed into a world where, the government has all this power to track, surveil, our human rights and liberties are put, um, are are in threat, and this could be kind of either or, kind of binary approach too. Like, how do you?
Exactly. So
Yeah,
exactly. So that's thank you for coming up with an example. So if a certain technology helps humanity, but there's a potential for its misuse, should we argue that it shouldn't exist? What's the third path? What's the both and path? Maybe the both and path acknowledges that there's a benefit to humanity here, acknowledges that there's a potential for misuse. And what's the reconciling third path? I think the reconciling third path is ethical design. Now, who mandates that? I mean, that's another thing. I mean, I think sometimes collectively we need to sort of agree on certain things. My company now has an ethics board, and it's independent, and it has a lot of thought leaders and constitutional scholars on it, which I think is really interesting. We get good guidance from people who aren't ourselves. But ethical design, in places where people really care about that, is a reconciling third path, because wouldn't it be great if you could have the benefit to humanity and then minimize the the potential for abuse and misuse? Then the technology still gets to exist and you get the benefit and you mitigate the downside. I mean, I think but I do see so many arguments just end up so binary. It's just like, this should exist. No, it shouldn't. Yes, it should. No, it shouldn't. It's like, well, why can't we just agree that like both of you guys are making really good points and find the third path that reconciles the first two?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's something that I try to do all the time also, like, I think a lot of times people think there's only one side, like, for example, it's either good or bad. Like, is technology good or bad? Is AI good or bad? But a lot of times it could be mixed. There's a lot of different, pros and cons. I mean, you talk about ethical design, but then, so there's this other angle where it's like, well, are all countries in the world really going to abide by some type of ethical design guidelines or standard when this gives immense power to become, perhaps a hegemony or just, a world leader if using AI in an uncontrolled manner. And it's an incredible weapon, and you go back to kind of, you mentioned kind of, maybe there's a human heart problem. Maybe there's something deeper beyond just the technology issues. Like how can we expect technology to solve all of our problems when,
we are flawed beings?
Yeah, like if you look at the history of the world, thousands and thousands of years, what is the history of the world? I mean, if it shows anything.
That's a both and too, though, right? Because you look at
exactly.
You just talk about SpaceX, and and then you've also got like wars and slavery,
exactly,
right? It's like, and human trafficking, which still exists today in a really big way. It's like humans are both awesome and also do evil things, and
exactly.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to like echo that. Like, the history of humanity is you have immense, horrible things that humans have done every generation. Like, it's a constant theme, wars and killings and just the unspeakable. And this happens across cultures, across time, across, periods. Yet on the flip side, you have amazing progress. You have amazing ingenuity, the creativity, the bringing together of human just mind and forces, to improve life, and to make immense, strides in that field. And it seems like in some ways, it's not complementary. It's not, it doesn't mix, but in some ways, like one of the analogies I like to say is sometimes I think things are two sides of the same river, where it's like you don't think that they some things you just can't reconcile. They're so different, it feels like. And sometimes I just get to this place where it's like I can't reconcile certain things because they're so opposite. And when I put them together, they don't match. But yet I have a sense, I'm confident they're actually two sides of the river. Like I need both sides to understand, or like the truth of the river lies in having both sides. And if I try to reconcile both sides and I'm not able to, and I just pick one side, then that's not going to be like the accurate picture, right? And so I think in terms of history, in some ways, it is two sides of this one river of human history. You have
Mhm.
immense, just crazy evils, but then you have immense creativity and the
Yeah.
goodness of people too, right? And in some ways, they don't seem to be reconcilable unless you kind of are okay with letting them be you know, as they are.
Yeah.
I mean,
Whenever and I love these kinds of conversations. It's like what I do all the time. I love it.
nice, nice.
I think for me, it always comes back to, okay, like, because I'll get a little overwhelmed, like the problems of the world are so big, and what are we going to do? And then I go, okay, what is my locus of control? Here are the areas of where I have control over my life, my family, my company, my world, and how can I be the change, which be the change you want to see in the world. And I think there's actually a lot of truth to that, because you're not going to solve the fact, or I personally am not going to solve the fact that somebody in another country might use a technology for ill, especially if I have no input into the creating of that technology. I mean, there's people more powerful than me working on these things, but and I'm glad that there's people are thinking about it and working on it. And Elon, this is something that concerns him, right? He's tweeted about this, about the singularity with the AI. So I'm glad there's folks who are worried about it and want to, force sort of international agreements on, ethical design. And I think ultimately sometimes it just comes back to, what's in my locus of control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I see that. And I also have, I mean, a similar theme, and I hope you don't mind this, like,
No, it's so
discussion
fun.
and conversation. I love this stuff too. But a similar theme is like, sometimes I ask myself, like, what am I responsible for? What
Mm-hmm.
is in kind of my realm of, and it changes at different times, in different stages and periods of life. Sometimes, I might be inundated by, like a few years ago, maybe like a infant and a 2.5-year-old trying to, just keep them alive and just manage life and just, and there's different stages, and there's a different time where, maybe there is that awareness, or maybe there is some resources or some relationships or connections or influence, right, to do something. So yeah, it's something I think about a lot. But I resonate a lot with your non-binary thinking, with the third path. And a lot of times the best solutions are, rather than optimize something that's suboptimal, like sometimes there is a real solution out there that actually can really nail the thing on the head. And sometimes we're just not open to it, because we're so boxed into either or into kind of a narrow mindset, rather than seeing kind of all angles of a problem and really just being free in our kind of thinking and trial and error, right? To poke holes and to think about different solutions to new things. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I think so many of the world's religions have branches that are non-dual. I think that there's a reason why so many things come back to it. It just seems like to be a recurring theme, in multiple aspects of life. And it's interesting too, because it is applicable in business. Not everything is zero sum. Some things are, but not everything is zero sum. And it's better if we can find the non-zero sum answer. What's the business jargon term? Win-win.
Yeah,
This is a
exactly.
win-win situation.
Yeah. Awesome. Just wanted to thank you again for just taking the time to generously share your experiences, your past, your thoughts. Yeah, I'm sure everyone watching, has benefited. I think maybe after like if you have a career change in the future, I think myself and many others would love to hear from you more. I think just having more interviews or more conversations or hearing kind of more perspectives from you, I think would be awesome. And I'm sure I'm echoing, the thoughts of many people who are listening.
Well, I just thank you. And thank you for doing that interview in 2016. I just say the community around Tesla is so supportive and affirming. That's new for me. Way back when, I feel like I got way more criticism and sort of hateful comments toward me prior to 2016. And so, you're part of that amazing community. It's really affirming and supportive. I think the world needs more of that. So I just want to thank everybody. People are really awesome and sweet, and I'm just blown away by some of the kind comments I've seen on Twitter. It's just really special. So thank you.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and link Andrea's Twitter profile in the video description below, so you can go ahead and take a look at it. I'll link to my past 2016 interview, as well as another interview she recently did on another, I think it was EV Stock channel. I'll link that in the video description for you guys to check out. All right, thank you, Andrea, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.